We'll call our June 15th, 2020 Planning Board meeting to order. First item on the agenda is the consent of the agenda from our March 2nd meeting. It's been quite a while. I don't know if anyone has any questions, feedback on that. Otherwise, we will be looking for a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, nothing in new business, so we will go on to old business. Couple items on the agenda for old business. I guess Jennifer, if I could get your help, just reviewing some of those, that would be appreciated.
Like Carly said, we have not met since March. A couple things came into play, of course, with COVID. And when that happened, the council made it very clear that commissions, committees, boards were not supposed to meet unless absolutely needed or they had business to take care of. So we did have a couple months in there where we canceled. They have dropped some things down the pipe that they do want the council to take care of. And one is the actual, we talked about back in March, the vacant buildings, maybe proposing an ordinance. That discussion revolved around the buildings that are downtown really aren't vacant. They're being used, they pay their taxes, they're paying their utilities, they're not in tax forfeiture, they remove their snow, they mow their lawns, so they're really not vacant, nor are they abandoned. But maybe the use is not so much as retail and service, but maybe more of a storage. So the city council agreed to most of those comments that you guys had made. And they wanted us to look at possibly changing the C1 ordinance then to not allow storage. The existing storage that's happening, that is in conjunction with the business is fine. So if you have storage because you own a business downtown and that's part of your storage because you have to store your wares, equipment, things like that, that's not a problem. Or if you have a storage facility, it would be like grandfathered in. But there was a little bit of fear, and maybe Sean can chime in. The council just doesn't want downtown to turn into just a bunch of buildings that are just storage. So we proposed, staff initiated Bill Spooner to draft a couple options. The first option that's in your packet is just stating that storage would be removed out of the C1 district. When you do that, well, let me back up. They placed a moratorium on storages in C1, which also, if you read the ordinance, if it's permitted in C1, it's also permitted in C2. So when we put a moratorium on it, that means no new storage units, no new buildings for storage would happen right now currently in C1 or C2. We believe that maybe C1 is a great transitional district that should be applicable in C2. Highway commercial storage facilities are all over C2 right now. So they want the planning board, like Katie kind of initiated before, to discuss, talk about where we want storage, if it is still an issue. Do we want to go with option 1 that has been presented, option 2, or maybe neither of those do you like, and there's a third option out there. The council is looking for feedback because right now they have placed a moratorium on storage in C1 and in C2. If you proceed with any of those options, potentially we could take that back to council, get a little feedback, but we could set a public hearing on whichever option that you desire for their next meeting, which is July 20th, and then it would have to be posted and published. Anytime you amend Chapter 36 or the zoning ordinance, we need to give full publication and notice to the public. They can come to a full public hearing and be heard. So that's kind of how that goes to amend anything in Chapter 36. So again, we have provided you with the existing ordinances. An option 1 would just be amending that C1 where no storage, but then again you'd have to amend C2 because that just seems realistic, that would be it. And then the second option is we included some of the language that The staff has been working on diligently for the last few years on amending our Chapter 36 that was recently codified. Just some of the language, some of the types of business, as you can see in the C1 and C2 districts, some of those types of businesses are very dated. And so we wanted to bring it up to speed just to have just newer, fresher, more current language. So I guess I would open it up for feedback, or if Bill or Sean have any additional input from what the council has desired.
I would just say that at the very least, we need to, it's the intent of the council for us to add in storage into C2. Regardless of what we do with the rest of it, I think the council intended us to move forward on putting storage back into C2. We're fine with it there. The temporary moratorium took it out, so that was something that needed to be fixed sooner rather than later.
And I would just say from my perspective, I don't really care where storage is, but if we were gonna do what the council wanted, I felt like it was important to make the changes that started on page 18, which is what the staff has been working on for a long time. The main reason was I think staff did a better job than the old ordinance did in terms of going through what's actually downtown and including it in what's permitted. And the other thing that they did, I mean, we've sort of been living this fiction that we're not allowing residential downtown, and clearly it's happening all around us. And so we wanted to say that it's an allowed conditional use, just got to address the parking issue is basically the reason we wanted it to be a conditional use. We want the owner, whoever does rentals, to have to address the parking. But we thought, I thought that as long as we were making a change to this section, we should quit pretending that we're not having housing and talk about how we're going to do it. And you may have other ideas on how that could be addressed, but that was the reason that I wanted to include that, was because I thought it was important, as long as we're dealing with those sections, to deal with that.
The other thing that comes into play is when you post and publish and hold a public hearing, there's costs involved. So if those amendments are desirable to you, we kind of are, getting two things done at one time.
So on page 23, subdivision 3, indoor firing ranges, is there one of those currently?
There is not,
Okay.
but there is a, it's not so much indoor firing, but there are some recreational venues now that have they could have fire ranges, I guess, but also axe throwing and some of those venues that have adult entertainment type stuff. Kind of like where you used to go to an arcade for kids, now it's like an adult, place of activities. So I think that was maybe one of the reasons we put that in. And there's a lot of, I guess, outdoor sport fanatics in our area. Not that we have one though.
Okay. The only concern that I had is that there's not a code for ensuring safety as far as wall thickness and whatnot, depending upon what kind of firing range it is.
I think that would actually come in under the building code. So it's not so much as actual zoning, but if you are actually going to change a building into, correct me if I'm wrong, Brad, into an indoor firing range, you would have to meet the code that would have that, correct?
I think your insurance company's probably gonna have more say in that. I don't think there's an insurance company out there that's gonna insure you with a firing range if your bullet can go through the wall.
Okay, good to know.
Bill, we gave a conditional use to the old funeral home. This isn't going to change any of that since I haven't started working on it, would it?
No, I mean, they have a conditional use permit to be, I forget how many, 3 apartments or whatever.
4 or 5, something like that.
But whatever, they all already have their conditional use permit for what was granted, yes.
If I could, I just, and don't mean to put anybody on the spot, so if you don't wish to answer, please don't. But I'm just curious on the voting members of the board here, if you would inform myself, inform me of how many people in our city of 2,400 people have voiced concerns to you regarding this subject. And I'll go first. I've had zero. And I truly mean zero. I have not had a single person share a concern about this issue with me. And maybe I just live under a rock.
No,
Very
and
possible.
I guess as of recent, I have not. I guess one of my personal views is the old G&T building. And I don't know, because it used to be a store, that you used to be able to go in there, and I don't know the circumstances under why it closed. I don't need to, but that's honestly, that's the only one that I am aware of. That
Have you had people approach you?
No.
Okay,
No.
I'm just curious.
Neither have I.
Randy, no? Sean?
I have, one of whom was a local business owner downtown who was concerned that this is becoming a problem. And I think, so that was a specific person concerned about storage, but there have been a lot of people who are concerned just in downtown in general, looking for some action to be taken. And I think this plays into the overarching goal of trying to revitalize and
But as far as this subject is one person?
one business owner, and that was within the last like 6 weeks.
Okay. Katie, do you care to comment?
That's a loaded question.
I'm sorry.
So the.
Would you care to comment on this subject?
Yeah, so, and I'm gonna refer back to St. Cloud and different research that I've done, but downtown as being an economic indicator of small businesses, it's better to have storefronts that are open and selling goods, selling services, because it really makes a difference in our community. And then it also makes a difference in people who are coming from other towns into our community to purchase items, to eat out, to be a part of our community as well. So one of the solutions that I came across was down the road of architecture, of historical architecture, and preserving that as a way to preserve or put in place safety restrictions. However, if you go down the architectural historical route, it creates a huge amount of cost that we should not be putting on our small business owners. It's unrealistic and just cruel. So I know when I before I moved here, when I would come downtown and I would go out to eat, there wasn't necessarily office space. I was originally looking for office space. There was a lot of buildings that were closed, specifically antique stores that were completely packed with stuff and being used as storage and not actually being open. Whereas a small entrepreneurial business owner that would potentially want to use that space, that's taken out of the city's resources, if that makes sense.
Thank you for sharing. Appreciate it. So, if I may, I'll just continue. It shouldn't come as any surprise to anybody who knows me that this is rather concerning. Anytime I see people's personal property rights attacked, it concerns me. A couple points that I'd just like to share is, and again, I'm just one member, I am one opinion, and I don't mean to say that I am right and someone else is wrong. I just am giving you my take on this, that this feels like a government solution in search of a problem. And I say that not because I just think that's a great thing, but because I have not had anybody else share this concern. I see this as being driven from City Hall. I see this as being driven by the City Council, and not having any broad public support. I just don't see it. I mean, maybe I'm just not seeing it, but I've looked and I've talked to people, and I'm not seeing it. So that's my first point. My second point is, anytime you do anything like this, what it does is takes buildings that are already incredibly difficult to sell, and it takes an entire group of buyers off the market. So we already have challenges moving buildings, and now we're going to put limitations on what that private individual with his private money who's paying for that building and then paying the taxes to the government on that building, we're telling him what he can and can't do, or limiting another limit of what he can't do. So that's just a couple broad points. Now, what really riles me, and I'll try not to get on a soapbox here, but the fact that it was driven, in my opinion, by the City Hall, I'd like to just have some exhibits of the City of Painesville's property in C1 Business District. This is C1. It's the same district we're talking about. It's all one district. It's the same district that I own property in and run my business in. Brad, could I put your finger to use there? I'm clicking through these pictures. There's maybe about 20 pictures. I mean, Sean, I'm sorry.
Yep, give me 1 second.
Absolutely. And Ron, I'll apologize ahead of time for throwing you under the bus. This is not personal by any stretch of the imagination. So this is the city's property on C1. Plenty of outdoor storage, some vehicles that don't have license plates on them. Yeah, just not a real pleasant thing to look at, but somehow this is okay. This is an acceptable use in C1 for the city of Painesville. Hold on right there, Sean. That's the city's building. Not a huge deal, but probably some deferred maintenance there. So when we get to other pictures of privately owned structures with deferred maintenance, I'm just making some comparisons, some general comparisons. I think that's a pump. I'm not quite up on all of the pieces and parts, but certainly some rodent issues, things like that, safety issues. None of this is roped off. Actually, you can stop right there, Sean. I don't know what that is. It was a barrel that you guys have sitting out there, an oil barrel with a beer can in it. I thought that was some kind of can in it. Next picture, please, Sean. I don't know, whatever that barrel is back there, but. So this, you can stop right there, Sean. This is now private property. And this is what I believe, this is an example, and I have a few examples, but this is an example of why we're sitting here talking about this. This is apparently a problem for the city of Painesville. Go ahead, Sean, next picture, please. Some outdoor stuff, some pieces sitting there, absolutely. But all in all, typical old downtown building. Nothing jumps out at me, but it is what it is. It was a building that was for sale, and these folks apparently, well, you can stop right there, Sean. These folks apparently bought that store, and I honestly don't even know who owns it. I could have done the research, but I didn't. But I suspect the taxes are being paid, and I suspect they're using it to the best of their ability. And they're probably using it to facilitate some type of business. Typically, people in the private sector don't spend money on things just on a whim. Usually it's associated with some other type of business activity. And so just because we don't see that store open when we stop in to visit, doesn't mean that it's not having some type of economic activity and some type of economic impact on our community. So this is another example, and I didn't really know what was driving this type of movement in the city council, but here's another example. I know people have mentioned the antique store. Go ahead, please, Sean. Well maintained. I believe they fixed the front. I remember a few years back the shingles were falling off, so it looks like somebody has done the repairs on that. Next picture, please. Looks pretty reasonable to me. So this is, stop right there, please. This is the former corner drugstore. Probably one of the more difficult visual buildings in our downtown, but again, not incredibly bad, all in all, given. Go ahead, next picture. If you see there's some bottom structure there that's missing. Next picture. Apparently, and again, I did not do the research, so I do not know who bought this, or if it's being rented or leased or purchased. I really don't know that. But obviously somebody has something going on there, and I applaud them. Actually, as I was leaving, and I don't have a picture of this, but as I was leaving, there was folks coming out of the side door were doing construction and remodeling type work in there. So I applaud them. Next picture. So, obviously this is about the most grievous example that I could find of what I'll call deferred maintenance. And, if that comes down and cuts somebody's head off, yeah, that's a problem. But I believe, and I would defer to Brad on this, is do we currently have something in place that could address something like this?
It was handled, the awning fell.
I know.
With the snow.
Yep.
And pulled away from the building, and they didn't come and screw it back on. Did they do a great job? No. But they did secure it back to the building.
So this has been approved by the city as being safe and okay?
Right.
Okay, so next picture, please, Sean. Yeah, next one. So that's back to where I started. So, I'll apologize again. It is not personal. This is not about throwing anybody on the bus. Matter of fact, what you don't see here is behind my shop, which looks just as bad and is also in C1. I am as guilty of that as anyone else. I've got stuff stacked up that would be just as ugly looking as that. My point, folks, is number one, we are taking away rights from citizens that will never, ever be given back. This always, for the last 250 years of our republic, only goes one direction. I encourage you to hold that to a high standard. When we take someone's rights away from their public property, I beg of you to consider that as not just a convenience for the city movement, but I really ask you to hold that to a high standard. And number three, I just don't see any people in our city that is what we are here for. I see no one in our city driving this. I just don't see it. What I see people in the city hall driving this, and I can't support that. So I appreciate everyone listening to me. Again, that's my opinion. I'm just one member, but I do appreciate your allowing me to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just, as a couple of thoughts, one regarding, I'm going to use your pictures, Bill.
Absolutely.
I drove past here on Saturday and the lights were on. The two people who bought this building are phenomenally nice people. They plan on doing a retail shop in the front of it and then doing some online selling as well, and then they're going to live above it. So I don't take away that there's maintenance issues on the building, but I think that's a plus sign that we can look at, that this is going to be hopefully rehabbed in some way and then used in the future. So that's really an optimistic thing in my opinion. Meeting the safety code, I think, is different from meeting the desirability and appeal. The city's aware that we need a lot. We need a better storage option. That's something that we've been talking about for years, and have decided not to raise taxes in order to pay for it, because we had other things that we needed to do, but are quickly hitting an impasse on that. I'd also look at, nobody's talking about we can't have storage buildings downtown. I had one person, so I shouldn't say nobody, but we have a lot of pushback on public safety downtown and the perception that downtown is unsafe. And I've driven through it at all times of the day. I don't think downtown is unsafe. I think that's a perception issue, not a reality. But I think that perception is being driven by the condition of some of the buildings. The paint falling off of the antique store that you photographed, the poles they look like barber poles because they're half white and half black. I think it's a maintenance issue on these buildings they are being used for storage. The antique shop is open, 4 days in the summer?
Yeah, it's very seldom, yeah.
I drove past once or twice. He doesn't have any employees. I don't know what significant economic value that's adding to the city. The old grocery store, I have never, ever seen or heard of it being open.
It used to be.
It used to be.
It did, yeah.
A few years ago, yeah.
I don't even know if the same folks own it, I'll be honest.
Yeah, and I don't know. But you brought up a valuable point of there's potential that they could be doing online sales. We would never know. With that, you wouldn't have the foot traffic in and out. I guess in my opinion, if just for example, if that were to be the case for that, then it's a business. And like you said, if they're paying their taxes, I don't know what kind of, I want to be careful, what kind of privilege we would have to know that, if that's something that we could find out. I don't know. But again, you bring up a valuable point. If it is an online sale thing, there would be no foot traffic. It could just be, fulfillment centers, maybe too broad of a word, but again, not that, the point is made that it could be online sales.
And
You know,
I get all of that. My thing is I look at this from a slightly different angle and I go, if we have businesses that are active and thriving, we might take away immediately somebody who would buy a building for storage. But by showing that the city is taking active efforts to revitalize the downtown, we might lose a small subset of buyers by taking away the storage, but we open it up to more people who are going to look at it and say, this isn't an area that's dying. This is a city that's putting work into revitalizing this. I can move my business there and not run the risk of losing my can in property value when the city just continues to deteriorate. So I respect that we would lose some people, I don't dispute that, but I think that we would net gain a significant number more by doing this. And we would address the safety concern, which is optics rather than actual.
Yeah, it surprises me that you combine those two subjects, just for what it's worth, Sean, because I see them as, matter of fact, I read this all 3 times and I never made that connection. So I would, and I'm going to choose to still not make that connection. That this has nothing, in my opinion, nothing to do with the perceived safety of downtown Painesville.
I'll admit it's a very small drop in the bucket.
Yeah. The other thing, a complete 180 here, just for what it's worth, is it surprised me that you guys now, if we do this on, I don't even know which page this is. I highlighted it, so bear with me. Here, on page 19, now it's the automobile repair and service would now be permitted in C1. So I guess I should have waited on my conditional use permit, because that would, yeah. But anyway, for whatever that's worth. I agree. I think that reflects more reality nowadays than maybe what it was. But I assumed that wasn't a mistake, but I wanted to point it out just in case it was.
It was probably because of you, because they knew you were here.
Well, there you go. I'm all for that.
And this was a joint venture. This was with the city administrator, this is with the city attorney, this is with Neil and Alicia, and we really tried, you know, based on 19 and 20, is go through the businesses that we have downtown and actually name them so that they would be permitted. They're already here. Let's make sure that they're permitted so that we're not having to go through all the extra steps.
Mm-hmm.
Could we add information security or information technology? Just because the main fiber runs along this main road here.
I don't have any objection to that. I'd wonder if that was included already in S professional services. But we're listing everything else, so I have no objection to including one more.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the goal, was to try to include everything that would be logical to have in the downtown business area. And so I think if you've got other ideas, it's not, that certainly would be the time to add. Or if there's things that are in there that you think are dumb, it's time to take them out. But it was,
And my hope is that this means we don't have to have this conversation about enforcement. I mean, that would be my hope. But I'm gonna throw out the idea that, I don't know how you'd enforce this. So the antique store's open 4 days of summer. I guess it's a business. I just don't know how you're gonna enforce that. And I assume you've already had some thoughts on that, so what is your plan?
Well, actually, I actually asked the council that because one of the points that was brought up is how would this be enforced and how do we know that there isn't foot traffic or service there? The staff asked that at the last city council meeting. Because I don't know, like Sean said, if they're open at, 2:03 a.m. to fill an order, I don't know.
Right.
But the answer is not really the direct answer to your question, but in part, the answer is that anybody who's there is going to be a pre-existing non-conforming use. They're going to be allowed. It's not
I get
gonna
that. I get that.
It's just, I think the thing is that if somebody, and oftentimes people that are buying businesses or properties in town go and check and they talk to staff down here about what their intended use is, and they would probably be told that if you're a storage facility, you're not allowed in the C1 downtown district, but you're welcome to look, for example, in C2 if you made that change, or they'd be encouraged to look in another zoning district. But you're not going to do anything about the antique stores that are here, whether, and you're right. I mean, the definition of is it an active business? I mean, clearly they're doing something.
Pretty different. Yep.
So but you're not going to do anything about that.
Okay.
I'm satisfied. But it's like many other things that the city deals with, the question of how do you enforce it. Typically, how you enforce it is you get a call from somebody who says, this person's doing this, is that right? And staff looks at it and they say, no, it's not. And sometimes it's because the city enforces something against one person, and then that person calls and says, well, I know 3 other people that are doing it, you ought to do something about them too.
Can't blame them.
But that's oftentimes how enforcement happens. It's the same thing with dog and cat licenses. I mean, realistically, how does the city know who has a dog or a cat that they can buy a license for? It's if their dog or cat, if their pet gets picked up by law enforcement, or if a neighbor complains that their neighbor doesn't license their dogs and cats. I mean, we can't know what everybody's doing. It's impossible, and it's not a perfect system, but it's a system that operates largely on complaint. Unfortunately, it's not ideal, but that's the way it is.
Appreciate the explanation.
There's a typo in H and on SS, so just before we send it for publication, those should probably be fixed.
What page?
18 and 20, it's lines H and SS. It says party probably instead of parts, and then on 20 it's get instead of gift. And then I know C1 goes, we tend to think of downtown as just the 2 intersecting streets and goes beyond that, but do we want exterminators allowed downtown on KK? That's the only one on this list that I would ask that we maybe take off, but we don't currently have it, so I'm not terribly worried.
What would be the reason for not having exterminators?
The chemicals that are used in them, depending upon what it is,
Okay.
would fall under Department of Homeland Security, chemical facilities.
I guess I'd rather see it in like a C2. My point, C1 should be more things where you can go in and buy something more retail oriented or service. An exterminator is a business that you would typically call out and have them come to you. I guess I will move the revised ordinance with the corrections to line H on page 18, line SS on page 20, the removal of KK on 20, and the adding in of information technology for recommendation to, or for setting a public hearing, I guess.
Second?
That, under line 4, letter B, like, I'm on page 24, rental storage units only in C2? Be careful about not allowing any personal storage in C2, or do we want it to be commercial only?
Could you clarify which, because there's a bunch of different copies with little changes in there, can you specify which one is only having storage in C2 being allowed?
I'm not following.
There's,
On page number 7, under C2, it says, under C2, letter B, it says all permitted uses as allowed in C1. So if you go to page 6, letter number 8, it says storage buildings. So anything that's allowed on page 6 under permitted uses are automatically allowed on page 7 under permitted uses.
right, but you were saying that there's a couple different options? So maybe, I went through it so many times that,
So as I understand it, option number 1, the city's already passed the moratorium. So the option that we could have is to say we do nothing, in which case the moratorium would expire in a year. I think it was 1 year.
Yes, it gives the planning commission time to research, mull it over, and
Yeah.
come up with a option to hold a public hearing on,
Mhm.
which I have been drafted, a couple.
Yeah, so if we did nothing, that would expire in a year. We could just change the C1 to not include storage and put it in C2. Or we could do what's been motioned, which is to revise the whole C1, C2 provisions.
So the option of just doing the storage in C2 is the option that's on pages 15 and 16. It would not change anything else other than take storage out of number 8 on page 15 and add storage at number 8 on page 16 under C2.
okay, so then the motion is for 15 through 27.
That's 18 through
Sure.
26.
Yes,
Okay.
with the various amendments that we discussed. And Brad, to answer your question, I'm fine with it as is, for purposes of my motion.
Okay, so that would eliminate the John and Jane don't live on a 50 by 100 foot lot, and they need a place to store their camper, they can't buy a lot in C2 and go to storage shed if they're not providing rental.
Yeah, and the reason I get there is because that's not commercial. If they're using that for a personal storage, that's not a commercial use.
Okay. Where do those buildings go then?
The township.
Because we already have them. We already have them. We have 2 on Highway 55.
Is there any type of companion commercial purpose with those?
That I'm aware of.
not those two.
Could we do a grandfathering of that issue?
Well, they would be already grandfathered, they're already pre-existing non-conforming according to this ordinance, the way it's worded. But
My issue with that is that I'm a classic example where I couldn't do that. I'm moving out of town, and if I'm gonna buy a lot in the township so that I can build a storage shed, I'm probably just gonna move.
Brad, what would you suggest in that situation?
I would just take the word rental off
On page
on page
what?
24.
What line are you on, Brad? Just help me find it.
Under, right at the top, letter B, number 4.
I see.
Right now, about 90% of our storage units that are rentable and non-rentable are in C2. We have some in industrial, those are also owned and rented.
So you would suggest taking out the word rental?
Yes.
There's no other place for something like that to go?
Industrial, but, you know, I mean, if somebody wanted to build one tomorrow, we don't have any industrial land.
And we couldn't do it on residential because you can't do a shed without a house.
Correct. We, in R1 and R2, you are required to have a dwelling before you build a shed. So it's pushing those people. And we as a community are imposing this upon people where we're already advertising to come to our lakes, hike, boat, camp, ski, drive your motorcycles, buy all this active equipment. And then, of course, some people have very small lots, which buyer beware. You need to know that before to be able to house your toys. But we are telling people to come and live here and then, you know, enjoy the amenities that we offer, but then they're not able to store their materials there or their equipment there. Hence why we have a large amount of rentable sheds. I mean, there's a couple of people that do they probably have a great business renting sheds to people.
Where I struggle is if you can't build a shed without a house in a residential, why should you be able to build a shed without a business in a commercial?
Why not? Give me a reason so I understand your position.
If something is zoned commercial, that's land set aside for purposes of the business. And if we say, look, you can buy it and build your shed there, now we're taking away land that would otherwise be used for somebody to open a business.
I guess we gotta think about is, does the planning commission and or the city prefer a building on the empty lots or not have any type of building on the empty lots? Whether it be residential or commercial or industrial. So whatever ordinance we propose, we have to look broadly and say, okay, are these type of businesses or structures going to give us a tax base on that lot versus no tax base?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I would just like to add is the people aren't here to satisfy the city. The city is here to satisfy the people. This is not Russia. This is not China. We are here to serve the public. And I see that getting lost all the time these days. This is not the city of Painesville versus the residents. We are the city of Painesville. The residents are the city of Painesville. And the city council and the building planning commission and the public works director and the building permit guy, and the secretary, or I apologize, Jennifer, because I don't remember your label,
That's okay.
and the city's lawyer is here to serve the people. Let's not lose sight of that, folks. Just because of a verbiage on a code. I'll quit. And I don't mean to be adamant, but I'm adamant.
My
So on
motion,
page- Sorry, go ahead.
my motion leaves it as is, but I don't think that stops anyone, we haven't voted on it, from making a motion to amend my motion.
I don't have a second either.
I will
Oh.
second.
Did I not hear? Oh,
I did, but then there was a follow-up thing, so.
okay.
Oh, so Carly said, I'm sorry. Okay.
What were you gonna say, Katie?
So now we're in discussion? Okay. So for rental storage units, you wanted to take out the word rental, and Jennifer is saying that that's not a viable solution.
No, I think that is viable.
It is a viable, okay.
I just don't know where else. I think that is a good transition. How do I say this? I think it's a good transition zone for storage. If you don't want to be in an industrial park. And then do we want industrial park lots bought up for storage to not be used for industrial purposes? To
Right.
bring, employment to town, whether it be assembly or packaging or welding or manufacturing. So it's a double-edged sword. Is where are they a good fit for? Do we give up commercial lots to put them in? Do we give up residential lots to put them in? Do we give up industrial lots to put them in, or do we send them to the township?
So how do I move to remove the rental word on page 24 under B? And go back to your motion, right?
Did you move to amend my motion?
Move to amend, thank you.
Okay.
Do we need a second for that?
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Second.
I second.
Okay.
So then the vote is on the motion to amend.
Okay, vote, for a motion to amend. All in favor?
Mm-hmm.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oppose?
No.
Opposed.
No, we have, so that carried, because it was 3-2, and then we have the motion originally. So now, my motion became all of the changes,
Yep,
plus removing rental
Okay.
from B4.
so then we make a motion to approve that?
So that's already pending, so you just need to take a vote on it or more discussion.
I
Okay,
have a discussion question. So as far as following all of this, people who are not in compliance, they're going to be penalized, would be my guess? No?
No, anybody who's not in compliance now, we can't, they're just grandfathered
Grandfather.
in.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Sounds good.
any further discussion? Yeah.
I'll call the question on the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose?
Opposed.
So one opposition? Thank you.
All right, on the next item for old business, wind and solar farm ordinance, page 27.
Okay, so back late last fall and early winter, the city experienced an influx in calls regarding, from companies that wanted to erect a solar farm to produce, energy for, but these were commercial. These were not just something that you put on your rooftop. This would not be something that you would put on a post outside your home to provide energy for your own use. This would be to sell. So a lot of them looked at the Furching property, and it ended up being they all backed out, whether they couldn't make the deal or there was not enough megawatts available with Xcel Energy. So, but it actually stimulated a lot of talk about, do we really want a solar farm in the city limits? And if so, where? Because these could be fairly large. And then do we want to use, property within the city limits of Painesville for this type of use? So the council, again, put a moratorium on it so that we could do a little research, find some examples, and then have, again, you with the planning board, mull that over and decide, is a solar and or wind farm for commercial something that we want in the city limits, and if so, at what zone? We looked at some examples. Bill drafted the ordinance that's in front of you, and looking at the type of industry it is, we thought maybe industrial would be the most appropriate place for it, but also to apply for conditional use, because we would want to make sure that the applicant there'd be things in the conditional use that would be regarding possibly fencing or screening from the other patrons or the other businesses up there. The decommissioning of it, if they up and leave after the solar is done, who's going to recycle all that and dispose of it if they just up and leave it? Because a lot of the materials that are used are, just can't be, just junked. They have to be recycled. So we brought forward a possible ordinance. Again, if it's something that you want to proceed on, we could set a public hearing and then get public input after it's posted and published. And it would be something that would be allowed in industrial. Yeah, I guess the other alternative would be is we wouldn't allow it at all in the city limits. They would have to find township property.
What would be the financial benefit to our community?
It would simply be the taxes generated off the land.
Because-
Really, there's no buildings there, so the tax value is a little bit greater than farmland, but not a lot. So tax-wise, there's no huge advantage to the city, and no, we don't get any or other profits off of it whatsoever.
Okay, just thinking, we haven't done the comprehensive plan yet, but thinking out 20 years when we're going to need that area, I would presume as we grow, I think we should be cognizant of that.
I guess the last comp plan that the community did, these really were not an item yet. So I don't think it's addressed in that, is it?
I don't think so. Last time it was done is in 2003. It is on the docket to be updated. But just like the wind, 10 years ago, the big wind turbines, that was a big high thing. Everybody needed a wind turbine to generate energy, and now they've kind of gone to the wayside for solar. I suppose if we wait long enough, they'll go to the wayside too. But I had 5 people call within like 3 months of time wanting a solar farm.
And part of it, I think, is that when we did address these issues at all in our zoning, I kind of thought it was a non-issue, because I thought that these farms would be so big that it wouldn't be practical for them to put them in the city.
Right.
But what's happened, and I don't understand how the legislature thinks or works on these things, but they've made an incentive for these companies to do like 10-acre solar farms. So now they're small enough they can fit. And the question is, if your desire is to have, for example, some of that property developed as residential or highway commercial, do you really, where do you want a solar farm to be? I mean, there's probably an area out there where it wouldn't be that bad, but I think you'd want to be able to control where it was, because you probably wouldn't want it to take up the developable land adjacent to the highways, in case somebody wanted to put some highway-related service there. I think it would make sense for that not to be in a solar farm. And then, I don't know, I mean, we don't want to take all of Mr. Furchy's options away from him, but I think the idea was to have some control over where you would put a solar farm in that, so it wouldn't take up the most desirable residential or highway commercial land for that use.
Could somebody explain to me where Furchy is? on
Yeah, it's the
map?
section of agriculture right up here
Oh.
on the north side.
So my input, 2 points primarily. It surprised me that it was bundled together because I see these as two pretty dramatically different industries. So that being said, it is what it is. You've already made it this far having them bundled, but it would have been nice to have seen it addressed separately. I see the solar fitting in industrial quite well. Whether that's with or without a conditional use permit, I don't know. I guess I can see the logic in that too, given the cradle to grave issues with that industry. I was surprised, that with the wind, that's a completely different beast, and when I read through pages 32 and 33, I guess starting out on 30, I didn't see the two primary issues that I've experienced being in the energy sector, which I was for a number of years. The two things that people run into with wind energy is shadow flicker and bird kill cleanup. And I don't see either one of those two addressed, so just a thought that as this is pursued, that might be one to be considered. Shadow flicker is a serious deal. You put up a wind turbine, in an adjacent property next to somebody's house, and they have a flicker going across their house, 8, 9, 10 hours a day. That's a big deal. And then bird kill cleanup is too, and people don't realize that, but these things kill birds, and then the birds lay there, and you end up with feral cats and dogs and coyotes and things. So that would be my only input. But I personally think that, I would agree with Bill. I wouldn't have thought it was an issue in the city limits, but given the opportunity to put it in an industrial area with a conditional use permit, I would support. But like I said, I would recommend some type of additional to those two concerns with the wind. Thank you.
I'd imagine with the wind, there would have to be height restrictions as well in city limits, correct?
Right now, in industrial, you can't exceed 45 feet in height.
Which is pretty much eliminated.
So if you
Yeah.
kept that as the height, and they can't meet it, they would have to ask for a variance, or they would not put it there.
Gotcha. Okay.
Theoretically, somebody could put up an individual
Right.
wind energy, smaller version, obviously, but
Do you think that's something that we would see in a commercial application? And I'm not familiar enough with what, like with the wind energy, what they would consider like a commercial application. I would imagine solar panels, or maybe it's the output of energy that they would have, that it would be, they put out this amount of power, is considered, that's when they would go to commercial. I guess I don't know on that.
Bill probably knows a lot more than I do, but I would imagine the most you could have probably on the amount of land that's out there is a couple, 2 or 3 wind towers. I mean, they need some separation. I don't know how
Right.
much, I don't know the particulars, but.
The original ones were typically 0.5 megawatt, now most of them are 1 or even 1.2 megawatts. So, I think at 45 feet, you aren't going to do any of that.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
It would be
Yeah.
it would be a guy like me building a homemade version to try and get some free electricity. It isn't going to be anybody trying to backfeed onto the grid.
Gotcha. I would have to agree that if you bring up a valuable point in regards to that it's not likely a commercial application would come in for the wind. In regards to the solar, I think industrial would definitely be the place for that. I think if you were to do a conditional use, again, addressing the cleanup, if there's, if they don't own it anymore, just some of those things. But I would see solar as a better option, I guess, if that were to be something that we were to allow.
And to address Katie's concern, and correct me if I'm wrong, because but my understanding of the tax system is it's based on the value of the components on the property. And those aren't cheap components. So I suspect that would have a reasonably decent tax base compared to, let's say, a shop like mine that's doing automotive repair or machining or that sort of thing. I think it actually would, it may be quite substantial for what it's worth. Don't quote me on that, but that's my gut feeling.
That would be if it's zoned industrial though, right?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't the zoning affect the tax base?
No, it's the way the land is used.
Correct.
Okay, so even though it's zoned industrial, it would still get zoned, or agricultural,
Yep.
it would still get taxed.
But to have a solar, if I remember what we did here, they'd have to rezone it to industrial. So the owner would have to request that it be rezoned to industrial, and then it would be a conditional use permit in it.
Okay.
The other thing that brought this ahead is if you look at this tan piece that's up here, the people that came, they just said, we want it in this area. Well, of course, it's like, it's over 100 acres. So how are we, there's plating involved and rezoning, and, was Mr. Furchy going to allow him to just run amok and just place it anywhere? So we want to also protect the integrity of Lake Avenue. It's an at-grade access. We put it, the city put in, decorative lighting, and hopefully we could have residential on one side and possibly, like Bill said, some commercial. So, if we put it in industrial, they would have to lot and block it, and they would have to rezone it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And maybe we should just be saying that we don't allow commercial wind energy. It might be that that's a dumb idea to even say that that's a possibility. Your point is well taken.
Given the size that it would be required for a commercial, I can't imagine any city wanting it in their city limits. That would be my gut feeling.
I would have no problem making, I can see that being a sensible approach to just say, that a wind energy farm is not allowed, period. Rather than go through setting a conditional use permit that makes it impossible for them to do it. Why go through
Yeah.
those?
Yeah, that's a waste of everyone's time.
Yeah.
I would agree that what's along the highway, any of there would just be, nobody would want to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe we don't want wind energy systems of any kind. I don't want to say that we would permit something. I don't know that we have any attached to a business or a residence in town, and maybe Bill's concerns are right, and that would just be a bad idea even to have a small one. You might create the same issues with the light flicker and whatever.
Well, I think based on the 45-foot height, I think it's a moot point. I just don't see it happening. That'd be my opinion.
So on page 30, under System Standards Electrical, it says all electrical shall be installed underground. There is plug-and-play modules, and they're economically viable for demographics that move, every 7 years or something like that. They're not necessarily going to permanently put them on their house. And so I would like to see that reworded so that if somebody was going to get a plug-and-play model of solar panels, that would be something that would be viable. And then also on 30, under 2, maximum area, non-residential uses 10% of lot area. I'm wondering if there's a clarification or history as to why that 10% is in there. Because it seems really small.
I wish I could answer answer your question. My guess is that was something that I stole from Stearns County's ordinance, but I'm not 100% sure, not without going back. Trying to find the origins of that.
For the city of St. Cloud, for the dam that's on the Mississippi River, the city actually gets to utilize the power from the dam. And I'm not sure exactly how they have that worked out, but if at some point our community wanted to be put on a microgrid, that might be something that we could think about in the event that there was a solar farm there.
I'm not an expert at it, but I mean, I think the financing that the tax benefits that they get for building those requires them to contract with, basically with NSP. They're not, I don't think these undertakings are viable without following the protocols that the legislature puts in place for them. I don't think anybody would do one of these and sell the electricity to a city. I mean, I just don't think it's doable financially.
Bill, right now this is worded to require a conditional use permit for the wind. Did you say you were thinking and recommending the same for the solar as well? I don't see it in here. I'm looking at page 38, section 36-129, which calls for just the conditional use permit for the wind. But I thought you had said you were recommending it for both, but maybe I heard you wrong.
It just says that a solar energy farm is a permitted use in I-1 and I-2.
Because
We could make it a conditional use, but it is not as it's written.
And my concern for making it a conditional use is, we're hearing the lecture from you every time we discuss a conditional use or a variance about the economic requirements in order to grant those. So can we really write in something requires a conditional use in order and still meet that sort of obligation?
It's actually, you hear that more from me on variances, Sean, not on conditional uses. I mean,
Okay.
conditional uses are by ordinance. The ordinance says what permitted conditional uses are, and if it's a permitted conditional use, then the council can grant that, and it can set whatever conditions it thinks is appropriate. I sometimes grit my teeth a little bit because we often grant conditional use permits and set no conditions whatsoever, so I don't know why we're going through the exercise. But it's really variances where we do have criteria that we should be meeting, and my opinion is that we rarely do.
Okay.
But it's not conditional uses. Conditional uses aren't that big of a deal. You could say it's a conditional use, and then the condition that you would place could be for screening or whatever kinds of things you would think would be appropriate.
And, excuse my dumb question, but what action are you looking for from the planning commission on this one? Is this?
I just drafted this ordinance just to generate discussion and,
Okay.
it's-
So you're not looking for a motion to come out of this to go towards the council or anything like that?
Well, eventually, but I mean, I don't think there's nobody that's pushing for a solar use or a wind energy use, so there's certainly time. The council has passed a moratorium, which means nobody can do either of those now. And so the idea was to provoke some discussion and get some feedback from planning on what makes sense in the future, and I'm open to suggestions, thoughts, additions, subtractions, whatever, we put something together to talk.
Perfect.
So,
Once we came to some type of proper wording or the wording that you would like to see, then you would set a public hearing, and we would have to post and publish that. So like on page 27, we would want to, like if you did something tonight with any corrections or additions, amendments to what's in front of you, you could set that public hearing for July 20th at 6:15. but it takes us that long to get everything published and posted, and then at that time, you would get public feedback. You would not have to act that night. You could make more adjustments, and then ultimately, you would make a recommendation to council.
I see.
Okay.
And that recommendation could be, no wind energy in town. It could be, solar energy allowed in I-1 and I-2 with or without a CUP.
Okay.
I would make a motion, based on the discussions that we've had so far, that we do have a public hearing to get public input. I would also like to see the industrial use. I guess the idea of having a conditional use permit isn't the worst idea because of the cradle to grave issues with solar. And I would also like to see us not have wind energy in town, city limits, excuse me. I don't know if that works as a motion or not, but that's kind of where I'm at with this.
So your motion in a sense is to call for the hearing.
To call for a public hearing, if that's the process that it takes to make this to the city council, to get.
And then allow it in industrial with the CUP.
Yes,
And then make the amendment to no wind energy within the city limits.
that would be my motion.
So I could change this drafted ordinance that's on page 35 through 39 to kind of incorporate those ideas, and you could have that draft at the public hearing.
We could review it then.
And then people could,
You could pass it out to the public and get their comment, feedback, and decide whether you want to go with it.
Second to that motion?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
I'm opposed only because I think we should have more definite language before doing the public hearing, but I agree with everything you said, Bill.
And yeah, I just am seeing it as a path forward, to be honest with you.
I'm going to abstain.
What was the
Yes. Oh, I said I'm going to abstain. I kind of feel like we're kind of putting the cart before the horse, and we should probably do the comprehensive plan, 20 years out. That way we can know where we want to be and know where we're going, rather than just saying, yes, let's do this. So, I'll abstain.
And I, in my defense of my motion, I would make the point that if we get 4 people here at this public hearing, I'd be impressed. I would actually expect it to be 0. So I just see it as another working session, and also being able to check that off the list of being able to put this to the city council. That was kind of my logic. But I can respect your opinion.
I appreciate your motion.
I'm sorry?
I appreciate your motion.
so 3-1 with 1 abstention.
Can we-
You were wondering about the taxes. I had just looked on the one that is just north of town up at a substation. The current taxes on that are $5,498.
Really?
But it's 148 acres, but I think there's 10 acres of actual facility. And I think it was 2014, I looked, prior to it being constructed, the taxes were $2164.
That's just,
So it's about double.
yeah, I expected it to be more than that.
That's overall taxes, not,
Live and learn. Thank you.
Bill, are we permitted, I guess we would have to be at a public hearing to make changes to the ordinance language?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
So it's
This is, the planning commission is gonna do the public hearing and then make a recommendation to council, and you can certainly recommend changes to what you're looking at that night. And I'll get something out that can get to you well before the public hearing, so you'll have plenty of time to look at it.
Thanks.
All right, then moving on to additional old business rental ordinance. Page 40.
Drafting a rental ordinance has been talked about for a number of years, probably 10 plus years, in and out of the planning commission. prior to Brad and I holding any of these positions. It's something that people have thought that regulating the safety of rentals is a good idea. Some type of a checklist to make sure that the homes that people are renting or apartments are safe. For instance, have smoke detectors, fire alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, egress windows for basement living, things like that. We looked at a sample back in March that Brad had presented from Hutchinson. At that time, the Planning Commission wanted to get some discussion from the council and some direction from there. Then in recent, they agreed that maybe something could be done, but they would like the Planning Commission to research it more. Then in less than probably a couple weeks ago, it was brought to city staff to look at the number of rentals that we have within the city limits and possibly regulating that. So before you is a proposed moratorium that's going to council on rentals in general.
What page does that start on?
So this starts on page 40.
Okay.
And
So this is a proposed moratorium. There is no moratorium yet.
it is proposed.
Oh, I didn't
I'm
understand.
bringing this forward because it's been discussed, a rental ordinance has been discussed for a long time in the planning, on and off with the planning board. Prior to Brad being the building official, prior to me doing all the zoning. So we've been working on it. You converted it back to council to get more direction. The council, did not deny it. They wanted us to do more work on it. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brad. But in the last couple weeks, this has been brought to staff to draft a moratorium on rentals, period. Not what we were working on, but a different, no more rentals.
So we are looking at two different things essentially then, correct?
Well, tonight we're looking mostly at the moratorium that the council is going to be considering.
Got it. Okay.
And, when they have the moratorium, if it passes, it's going to come back to you.
Yes, yeah.
So, Sean, do you want to expand on that at all?
No, you've covered everything that I recall.
So, staff just got this. I wanted to keep you in the loop because we've been discussing rental ordinances.
Question. So you say staff was approached to create this by who?
Council.
Council persons. Okay. Not residents.
No.
Okay. Well, I would just comment on page 41, A, 1, 2, 3, 4, fourth line down, where it states that the Planning Commission is concerned with the expansion of rental of residents located in residential commercial districts throughout the city. I'm not sure what gleaned that statement, but I would say that not all members of the Planning Commission are concerned with expansion of the rental of residents located in residential commercial districts throughout the city. Because I, as a member of this board, am not categorically. I see us as America as somewhat of a dying empire. I look at my children, who not a single one of them owns a house. I see that the American dream of owning a house is becoming more and more unattainable every day. Every stock market crash where the rich people get richer and the poor people get poorer. And given the fact that we have a shortage of, I would suspect, all levels of residents, rental residents, but especially lower income, affordable housing, this seems counterproductive to me. But that's just my 2 cents.
So it's really just being presented as informational because it will come back to you, just to kind of try to give you as much information as possible. Because
Right.
if it does pass, at least you'll be aware of it, and it'll be our next thing that we'll be working on.
I appreciate that. This is nothing personal, absolutely zero.
When I bought my house in St. Cloud about, I don't know, 15, 18 years ago, we had, in the St. John's Cantus neighborhood, we had 14% rentals. During the last Great Recession or Depression or whatever it was called, we broke over 50% in rental units. And many of those rental units were not owned by people that were in the community. They were owned by people in other states. And it caused a lot of problems in our community, and it drastically reduced our property values. So, so if everybody could just take that into consideration.
I think, I don't know this for sure, but I think this has something to do with sober living. Sober houses.
Well, I read all this and I didn't see any comment on there about sober houses.
That's my, I think.
Okay, well, you can understand my concern is
I
that
do, yeah.
this needs to be absolutely 100%, what's the word I'm searching for? In the clear, and everybody needs to be on the same, there can't be any code here. This is the public domain, so I'm gonna not associate your comment with this because there's nothing in here that says that. But I can appreciate your intuition.
And I don't have any insight on whether that's true or not. I don't know who brought this forward. This is the first time hearing of it. I agree, home ownership is a huge problem. And I think this moratorium is a double-edged sword because on the one hand, it restricts access to more rental properties. But on the other hand, developers coming in and buying up all of the cheap single-family homes is part of what's driving the cost of those single-family homes, making ownership impossible. So I know, Bill, we disagree on the rental ordinance in general, but I think I would prefer to just see that move forward, and I'm not sold right now on the moratorium idea. Especially if there's an underlying factor of the recovery center. Agreed, it's not in here, but if that's a thing, no.
And Brad, help me understand on things, on property that, and I think it states it here, I highlighted it, a large, this is page 40, a large percentage of rentals would not meet this ordinance. So what happens with the things that are in place prior to this being passed?
That's what needs to be decided with the ordinance.
Okay.
But this would be different than a zoning ordinance. This would be, I mean, a rental ordinance would be an ordinance that would be enforced against existing rental properties. It would be different than zoning. You don't get grandfathered into to this. The idea would be that, you know, and it would take time. I don't know. I mean, Jennifer said there's a list of known rental properties here attached, so I guess it gives me some idea of how many there are. Brad is our total housing inspection force in the city of Painesville, and I know he's got other important things that he needs to do, so I suspect if you adopted a zoning ordinance, not everybody's going to get inspected immediately. It's going to be a process, you know, so it'd take some time, but I think the idea would be that you would try to move people into compliance.
Well, I'll state this, you know, nobody is against safety. Nobody, you know. I understand the logic of fire extinguishers. I understand the logic of CO2 detectors and smoke detectors. You're never going to hear me opposed to those safety things. The biggest red flag is that there is a large percentage of rental units right now that structurally cannot meet this. So, and I am purchasing 2 of them, closing on the 30th. So I'm not trying to be personal on this, but in some ways it is personal. But I'm just saying that when you have a C1 district where there is building to building and you have apartments in there are apartments with bedrooms that don't have windows. And so what do you do with that? Neither one of my apartments that I'm purchasing would meet the egress window. It won't. And a large portion of the other downtown ones won't either, because there's only windows on the front or the back. And even my apartment that I have at 201 Minnie Street doesn't have, we measured it, the windows aren't, they're just slightly under the legal egress requirement. So I'm as a rental owner, I'm concerned and questioning, what do you do about that? Because you cannot make them. It just physically is not possible. What do you do then?
The building code allows you to install sprinklers, that's how you get away from it, not that that's what I'm advocating.
I missed your first part of your statement, I'm sorry.
The building code would then refer to installing sprinkler systems. Those otherwise or else they would not be rented. That could not be used as a bedroom.
And yeah, that's a significant concern, just obviously. I would venture to say 50% of the downtown apartments, and this is a wild ass guess, but I would say 50% of them will not be rentable, simply because of the egress.
So if we make a motion to vote yes on the moratorium, that gives us more time to discuss the building.
Actually, you don't have to vote on either, it's just here for your information. The moratorium in zoning can go directly to council without planning input. But we're actually talking about two different things here. We're actually allowing, one, what Brad has brought forward about addressing the rentals and their safety and going through and doing an inspection with a checklist. That's what we've been talking about up to this point. The second thing is the moratorium that's in front of you is just putting a moratorium on any homes or apartments, any more being rented, any more rentals, period, until more research can be done. So,
I may have misunderstood, but I did not understand this moratorium to be related to any business. I thought it came out of the housing study somehow, but maybe I misconstrued that. But I thought that was that someone construed the housing study to say that too many of our properties in the price range that low-income people could afford are being taken up by rentals when they could provide homeownership. But I may have misinterpreted that, but I thought that was kind of in the housing study that was presented.
Any other discussion, feedback in regards to that at all?
I would assume that even if we take no action, at least some of our feelings and opinions would be carried to the city council when they take up this. I appreciate that.
I guess one of the questions I have, if we were to implement something, do we have the ability to put a time frame on when potential fixes would need to be done? Like, are we able to set that time frame? Obviously, some of that stuff would be a very large financial burden, but are we able to put a time frame onto that?
I suspect that's how it would work, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we have to be reasonable, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Okay. That was my only question.
I don't know if any of the examples you've looked at, Brad, have tried to do that. I mean, I know that cities do that in other areas where they essentially have like a sundown provision that says you have, this long to come into compliance, and if you don't, we're shutting you down, basically. I haven't looked, you guys have been looking at these rental examples that you've been finding, and I haven't looked at them. So I don't know if other cities have incorporated that kind of language into their rental ordinances or not, but it seems like a reasonable approach to put some kind of a time provision where you give people a period of years to get done with.
Right.
And I would say it would be a reasonable approach to have some type of a grandfather clause where the properties that are already there, that have been rented out for 3-4 decades, somehow are able to continue to be used as what the owner bought them for. So
And maybe you could do that as to some of the requirements, but not all, so that you.
Possibility.
I mean, you might have some that you say, look, we just can't make you not comply with these, but we'll give you some leeway on a few other things. I suppose it's a possibility.
I would just say that when you're dealing with buildings that are structurally impossible to make up to current code because, they're 100 years old, that's how that works. And by the way, that's what makes them affordable housing, which we are short of. I see that as a logical approach, for whatever that's worth.
So I would like to make a motion on the moratorium because we are entering into a recession, and I want to ensure that our properties remain available for home ownership, and that the properties are not just bought up by outside entities outside of our community.
You need a second motion? Do we have a second? Or do we need a second to that motion?
We could die for lack of a second.
Yeah, I think you can just give it a reasonable amount of time and declare it dead.
Okay, motion is dead then. All right, going into informational, building inspector's report. Ed?
Permits are down year to date compared to other years. I suspect that our current situation, economic situation has something to do with that. There are some large projects knocking on the door. The apartment building is looking to get started very soon, and the assisted living is starting to do boring, soil boring, so they must be doing some engineering.
I brought up the funeral home earlier. Have they started anything over there? Any musings on when they might start rehabbing that?
Because of the same things that we discussed about interior bedrooms and that, and requiring, and Jim Tews with Litchfield also, I concurred with him, that we're asking for engineering or architecture, figure out a way to make it, the inside rooms work, and I haven't seen anything from him. That's been a few months.
Okay.
All right, our next meeting then will be Monday, July 20th, 2020 at 6 p.m. Join the meeting.
Nice to see you all.